Thank you very much indeed. And I have to apologize for pretending to be able to deliver anything interesting Friday afternoon, which is definitely not true. But it was the mismanagement of that speech was due to the fact that incumbent Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, received the most prestigious award yesterday in Germany, and he asked me to accompany him, and it was like an offer you can't refuse. So, in the old days of Godfather, of course, there was the Luka Brasnik who was sent to execute the powers of Godfather. So I hope Prime Minister Tusk doesn't want to go that far, but I try to be nice and friendly, and instead of flying to Dublin, I decided to join him on the flight to Aachen, and then by car driving to Amsterdam and hopefully reach Dublin late night yesterday. So sorry for all those troubles. In compensation for that, maybe I will try to be very brief, and it's also possible due to the fact that the slides are self-standing for themselves, and it's not that difficult to read them. What I would like to show is what are the Polish concerns and how it looks from our perspective, and also end up with the few challenges we face in the future. And one slide is exceptional, which I decided to include into my presentation. This is the Polish Prime Minister slide, which is a very powerful slide, and he's extremely proud of that. So I will mark that this is the slide of the Prime Minister Tusk. So, as we said before, I'm a good alumni of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, where we spent some time together for 4 years precisely. I like also to use some of the reports of the EBRD in order to show the Polish situation and transition over the years. So EBRD likes a few transition indicators and then measure it for each country. So when we have the minimum with one line and the maximum for the transition countries, and also what is important, 4.5 means good Western European standard. So when we speak about the banking reform, which particularly is close to my heart, so if we look at the Polish banking system, and also Anthony made a reference to cooperation between Poland and AIB starting from the early 90s, so we can observe that for Poland, for the banking reform, it's 4. It's 4. Grade 4 is a good Western European standard for the Polish banking reform. And this is also what I think today about the shape and soundness of Polish banking system. So that shows that Poland was not that bad student, rather doing good grades, and then like some countries which are the laggards of transition, doing one means grade 1 is, frankly speaking, a disaster, and I don't want to mention the most advanced country. Of course, like EBRD was not always right, because sometimes the best pupil in the class suddenly becomes less good student, and the Latvian and Estonian banking system practically collapsed of the banking crisis of 2008. So sometimes EBRD was a little bit too much focused on the reform side, on the privatization side, on the organization side, and not sufficiently enough focus on the risk side. But this is a very banal statement that banking is about risk and risk management. And that's why maybe those countries were advanced in the banking reform were not providing sufficient level of risk management. Okay. So that, but nevertheless, the slide shows that Polish grades scores were not that bad. So if we go forward, so the GDP performance over the years, one could say that immediately when I was ousted from the government, the GDP growth returned on track. So, which is okay. That means that the voters are always right. Also, that shows, okay, this curve, of course, is an average for the transition countries. But what was the most painful, if I may show you, was that in some countries, decline lasted too long. And then, of course, if it lasted too long, that led to the social unrest, and at the end, the democracy was more or less rejected in so many countries of Central and Eastern Europe. But in Poland, it's very clear. You see, 91 Bielecki, then out of Bielecki, and immediately we are going up. So this is a clear evidence that the voters are always right. But the scale of fiscal adjustment at that time was comparable in Poland was comparable to fiscal adjustment of Greece of today. So, okay. And then this is also what the EBRD likes a lot, which is to answer the question, how quickly your economy could be back on track and achieve 1989, the day when the transition began in all those, actually 27 countries of Central and Eastern Europe. And what's important to explain to the public that we have exceeded 1989 level. That means that the necessary adjustment, painful, but nevertheless, scope of reforms was not that bad because the economy has regained the capability to grow and the country to develop further. So the Polish is the red line. Okay. Okay. This is the slide I mentioned before. Even though the source is the Commission, this is the slide of the Prime Minister Tusk. He knows the best. And he calls it a green Poland. It used to be Green Island, I understand, but for the time, over the Irish. Yeah, for the time being, we like the color. So I was not authorized to present it in different colors than using green, actually. So I think that for this year, for 2010, the situation, okay, in a few countries will be improved, because when you go down minus 10%, then it's easy to go up 1% or so, but still many countries will be in negative numbers. I don't want to name the countries which will have negative growth for this year, but at least one country in the south I know very well in negative numbers. And also the growth for Germany and France will not be impressive either. And Britain, of course, will be in the red again. Okay, that's what we have to observe. And what the economists call the net exports. So the net exports contribution to GDP was important due to the fact that the zloty depreciated. And of course, everybody knows that this is a so-called advantage, of course in brackets, of being outside the monetary union, that you could have either a fiscal adjustment or exchange rate adjustment. If you are inside the Eurozone, then of course the exchange rate adjustment does not exist. So the exports help us a lot. And as you see, domestic demand shrunk in 2009, and the incumbent government tried to create a lot of stability in the country, and in order to keep the demand in rather positive mood, because it's very easy to undermine demand by injecting a lot of pessimism and into the public. And so the public and the consumption responded quite well, so the consumption also and domestic demand, therefore, will contribute to the GDP growth this year and next year as well. Yeah. Okay, this is what we spoke, and if you look at the numbers of Polish exports in the beginning of transition, which is 1990, practically the Polish exports was something like 15 billion US dollars, out of what 1/3 was provided by exports of coal. If we look and compare today's export, which goes much above 100 billion, there's a huge evidence that economy gained the ability of adjusting to, as we call it, competitive forces. And also, what is important, that the imports was never so much above the exports level. So in other words, the current account deficit was not a burden to Polish sustainable development, where there were so many countries, before even the crisis hit in 2008, which ran a current account deficit much above 5%. And the Baltic countries even above 10%. So that was a big question. Is the textbook wrong, suggesting that above 5%, sooner or later you could have a problem with that deficit on current account? Or some countries have been writing a new economic theory. At the end, we came back to basics, to old economic theory, that the current account deficit measured in double digit is simply unbearable and leads to the crisis. Okay. And of course, this is a typical situation for a country with a bigger internal market. So when you have bigger internal market, and Romania is another example, then of course you are not that much export driven. Slovakia is another case, completely different case to Poland. Slovakia is so much driven by exports, so especially when they joined Eurozone, and the exchange rate for entry was rather high. Therefore, for them, recession after 2008 was inevitable. Whoever would be the prime minister of Slovakia, there was no simply room for maneuver. Slovakia was deemed to go into recession. Okay, this is one of few slides related to the banking sector, but this is important because it depends. But also, maybe one general comment regarding the slides. Whenever you look at these slides, please figure out one similarity, one specific similarity, which is that the performance of Poland is very close to performance of Czech Republic, which is marked here CZ. So, which is even a surprise to me, because historically, Czechoslovakia, particularly before the Second World War, was much more advanced country than Poland, we have to frankly admit. By 1938 standards and measures, the GDP of Czechoslovakia, 1938, so 1 year before the Second World War, the GDP of Czechoslovakia was equal to Spain. Exactly the same level of GDP per capita, where Poland was at the GDP level of Greece at that time. And so we are always historically, over the last 45 years or so, closer to countries like Hungary, with all the problems of Hungarians facing in these days. And surprisingly, over the last decade or so, we became more and more similar to Czechs. And all the numbers and basic indicators and ratios are bringing us close to Czech Republic and differentiating us from Hungary, which, as I said before, because Hungarians were the best country, the best performing country during the communist days, and when the Iron Curtain was drawn. So this is a surprise. And that's when we look again at the banking sector and conservative management, risk management, and loans to deposit ratio is a very important indicator. Loans to deposit means to what extent I'm an optimist. And unfortunately, on this slide, I don't know why, but I didn't put Ukraine. But if we have here Ukraine, then where would you place Ukraine? Who knows? Ukraine. more or less. Okay. We don't have too many supporters of Ukraine, I think. So, okay. So if we find Ukraine, if we place Ukraine, we must go above the scale. Yes? Because the slide shows that if we are here, more or less, then we have loans and deposits at the more or less equal level. That means that I lend to the customer as much as I can collect in deposits, yes? More or less. When I'm an optimist, like they were colleagues in Ukraine, then that ratio goes into 400. So that means, and what it means in practice, when you are the person managing the bank, that means that if I don't have a funding from deposits, then I have to find the funding from outside, from different sources. And then the Ukrainians found a lot of funding outside the country. Yes, they could bring funding from capital markets, and at that time it was very cheap to get financing from outside, but it led us to the crisis. And that slide also shows to what extent the banking sector was over-leveraged. And the more you go behind the red line, the more you have problems today. And so that shows that the basic rules of economy are, unfortunately or fortunately for some, are still operational. Okay, this is another managerial risk which needs a comment. And that was a subject of a big or massive dispute also in Poland. In which currency we would like to lend to the customer? Why? This is an important question. In a nutshell, the problem is that if we have Japanese yen, then the interest rate on Japanese yen historically is one of the lowest or the lowest in the world. Sometimes the Japanese yen had a negative interest rate. So that means that in nominal terms, the cost of monthly servicing of debt with the nominal interest rate lower is lowest. The only problem is, and of course, also in Poland, a lot of young people and almost all journalists, this is very specific and symbolic, that all journalists in Poland were enough intelligent to, of course, to borrow in the most sophisticated currencies, but not that much in Japanese yen, but mostly in French franc. The problem is that the cost of monthly servicing is much lower than you do it in zloty, so you look like a person who is 5 times more intelligent than an average. The problem begins when the currency is depreciating. Then, of course, you have a problem, and you call it a situation. Because that means that I borrowed 100,000 zloty, but because I found it in Japanese yen cheaper, and I know one friend of mine who did it, Then when the exchange rate is changed, suddenly his outstanding debt was doubled. And it's not nice. And up to date, of course, it's not going down a little bit. So suddenly all the expenses are much higher. And those countries which have the blue diagram, they all face a huge banking sector crisis. Practically, the three Baltics, EE, which is Estonia, LV, Latvia, and Lithuania, they collapse, they bankrupt. The only good news for them was that the banking sector was in 80% controlled by the Scandinavian banks, so simply and quickly they interfere and bail out the local banks. So that was the currency risk converted into the shape and soundness of the banking sector in particular countries. Okay. And this is a little bit more sophisticated point, but historically it depends what economic textbooks you study, but then you differentiate yourself from those who think that the credit creation is good. And on one side, you could be a supporter of Keynesian economy, and then you believe in credit creation. If you are closer to classical economy and the Austrian school, then you don't like it too much. So that shows also how the bank credit was provided over the years in the region and in Poland in particular. Okay. And this is a little bit more difficult, but shows something what is important. And when you are in troubles, then they ask you how much capital you have. If there is a prosperity, then nobody cares about the capital. This is what we call over-leveraging of economy. And it also includes some of the Western European banks, not only the banks of the region, as you see. And that slide shows that unfortunately the capital adequacy ratio is in Europe not very high, and differentiation between European countries is very significant. Okay, if you have a low capital ratio, then you should have at least a strong taxpayer. And you have the Netherlands, and you have the Germany. Yes, because the Commission always is politically correct, so they provide the names of the countries in original versions. So it's Deutschland, so very low, as you see. But at least they are rich, so the countries manage quickly over the crisis to recapitalize the banking sector. And without that intervention, ING, very well-known bank, would collapse immediately. So that slide also shows that, well, you have two options. You can recapitalize if you have rich taxpayers, or you have a problem. And Poland stands quite well, as you see. So the Polish banking sector is highly capitalized and very high capital adequacy ratio. Okay. That was a little bit propaganda. This is another way of looking for troubles. This is what the European Commission these days is producing. That means how the corporation, the business sector, is optimistic and leveraging buying the future. So on the basis that, okay, I borrow a lot of money because I know that the prosperity will continue, and thanks to that I could manufacture more and more and more, and therefore I would become rich. So the more you are optimistic, the more you borrow. And as you see, the Poles, again, very close to the Czechs, not that optimistic, not that over leveraging. I don't want to recall the country which is on the slide on the top right, because maybe this is a mistake. And I have to double check the source. But what worries me is not the nominal level, frankly speaking, when looking at that slide. What worries me always the most is a dynamic, is a trend, yes? And change in financial debt in 2002 and 2008 in percentage point of GDP. And this is worrying, because that shows that Poland was growing, but not that much. But why these countries were so optimistic, yes? And this is also, that slide practically shows a fundamental difference between two groupings of the countries regarding the crisis, in my opinion. Because you have, where do we have it? I'm looking for Greece and I can't find it. This. So, and Portugal, yes. So, Greece and Portugal, in my private opinion, belongs to the countries which caused big troubles, not due to the expansion of the non-financial sector and heavy borrowing, but through the typical fiscal or lack of public finance discipline. So Greece and Portugal simply made a beautiful assumption that we want to spend like the Scandinavians, and we want to tax like the Irish, for example. So in other words, spendings measured to GDP 50% more or less, taxation very low. So how it is possible, I don't know. But that was the way the government ran those countries, which led them to the fiscal crisis and public finances in shambles, in tatters. But they were not developing business too much. Where the island and these countries, and Spain should be somewhere. Yes. Oh yes. They were developing business. So they optimistically developed banking and non-banking sector and grew through the lending. And dynamism was massive. And that's why we have in Spain, nobody knows, 1.2 million of built and not sold apartments, but some people are giving bigger number, up to 2 million. That shows that there were construction companies were borrowing money, building apartments, waiting for the speculators to come and to buy in Costa de Costa or something like that. But unfortunately, didn't happen. So Ireland, unfortunately, a little bit more also belongs to that group where they the borrowing level was unbearable in a longer term, and that change in financial, that shows that they were very optimistic regarding that the boom will continue, and didn't continue. So I don't know why, because the Poles were always not reasonable people, but why you are so conservative is difficult to understand. But sometimes it helps. Okay, then of course, as you may see, non-performing loans are not looking as bad in some countries when the financial crisis hit them. You have Korea, you have practically two different crises. One is this Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Korea, Malaysia, of 97, and then 98, Russia. So one could say that above 25% of bad loans is a crisis level, where Romania is only hitting 15%. But of course, this is about the region. In this country, I understand that the amount of loans which will be transformed to the bad loans bank could go up to the crisis level. So, okay, I'm not to comment that. Okay, and this is a recalling of classical economy and the famous Austrian school, and Ludwig von Mises is one of the greatest economists of that time, and simply if the boom is so much driven by credit expansion, then sooner or later you must collapse. That's more or less the consequence. And this is a situation which we know from Europe, and not only from the region, that the fiscal imbalance or imbalances are not bearable, are not sustainable, and some of the countries are running the double-digit fiscal deficit. Okay, then, and we have this situation in the region which does not look that bad as in Western Europe, because in Western Europe, for the Western members of the European Union, I think the average is now in the range of 75%, if I remember well, where in Central and Eastern Europe you have only one country which is reaching that percentage of general government debt to GDP. And that's the observation which I already made looking at the previous slide. But here we have also is something what worries us. which is the dynamism, yes? And year on year, the debt to GDP ratio grew at the highest speed in those countries. And so, and that's, that I put a little bit for the purpose of propaganda, I have honestly admit. Why I'm saying this? Because I put here without open pension funds. Because we introduced a reform of pension system in Poland 10 years ago, precisely 11, which is very expensive to the public finances system, because we immediately transfer cash to those funds as a long-term liability to the future generation. Where in the majority of governments is just a liability of a generation, present generation, against the older generation, the pensioners. Now, if we, that's why I deducted here this cost of modern pension fund system which we introduced. If we include it, we go up to that level, because the total debt of Poland is 35% without open pension fund system, and with is in the range of 50%, 50. So, and we have been arguing with the European Commission and Eurostat in particular how the system should be calculated, because only in few countries, like the system is different than pay as you go, which is definitely the most popular solution. Okay, maybe this is a more slide for me than for you, but the slide shows, first of all, that regardless the volatility, which is very high on the market, when you try to place on the market your government bonds, you pay the price above the German papers, securities, and how much you have to pay more is called a spread. And of course, when you look at spreads like this, so you understand the situation of country like Greece. Suddenly, when the crisis again hit them, had to pay unbelievable price for their treasury bonds. Okay, very quickly. There is no easy road for anybody in Europe these days. So I also would like to recognize few serious challenges, which is also what is important. Those challenges are a little bit contradictory, because on one side we want to maintain fiscal discipline. At the same time, we have this ambitious infrastructure development program, so which is often directly financed from the state budget. So to keep the the balance between the momentum of further development and also utilization, the best way of utilization of European funds now transferred to Poland on one side, and on the other side to maintain fiscal discipline, because we learned from the previous slides that credit expansion is extremely dangerous weapon who might be turned against you. And this is what the Commission said in the latest report 2 weeks ago, more or less. They also recognize Polish problem because they encourage us to continue catching up, and catching up and converging means also develop and improve infrastructure on one side, but on the other side to curb structural deficit, which means to cut some spendings. We try to maintain that balance by assuming for the next year that the spendings should not grow more than 1 percentage point in real terms. Okay, so that's more or less the challenges. Of course, that has to be done in the days of huge volatility, which will last definitely for the next few years to come. So, thank you very much. I think I was much too long, but that makes them even more tired. So
it was quite fascinating.
so,